Good evening. Let me try that again. Good evening, everybody. This is Bob Mader, Chairman of the National Association of Flight Instructors. Glad to have everybody here tonight. Tonight's guest is Mike Adams, Senior Vice President of Underwriting. Mike and I have known each other for a couple of years. Mike's been in the insurance business, aviation insurance business, for over 30 years. He joined Avemco in '86 as a regional sales manager, became vice president of underwriting for Avemco, and recently was promoted to senior VP. Mike tells me that he got his private pilot in '82 up in the northwest corner of the country, and in self-defense, he got his instrument rating shortly after that because it's hard to fly in the northwest without an instrument rating. And before we get started, a couple of ground rules. Right now, I have everybody but Mike and myself on mute. We'll open it up for questions a little later because Mike's got a presentation. Any questions that you want to ask, in the meantime, we've got a couple of folks from Avemco helping bird dog the chat room. So if you have any questions, feel free to toss them in there, and we'll open up the mics a little later to bring everybody on board. With that, Mike, welcome to tonight's webinar. I hope you're warmer in Frederick, even though you have more snow than we do here in Omaha, than I am here in Omaha tonight.
Well, yeah, it's lovely to be here, and anyone that remembers the old Laugh-In series, instead of being high atop the hotel, whatever, in lovely Burbank, we're on the ground floor of 8490 Progress Drive in Frederick, Maryland, where it's a balmy 26 degrees with gusts to 25 and snow flurries. But it's not bad here at all.
Great. Well, glad to have you here. And Avemco is NAFI's insurance partner and a good friend of ours as a whole. And I'm proud to know everybody at Avemco. They've taken good care of our members and, quite frankly, me personally. It's a great relationship. So, Mike, if you're ready for me to turn over the slideshow to you, I'm going to do that.
Yes, I am ready.
All right, here we go.
Okay, and everyone can look at the, I apologize for the okay, so everyone should have a picture of a Skyhawk on their screen now. Okay, that's good. Before I get into this, I want to address one thing. Someone had made a comment out on a chat room about the presentation this evening, and they referred to it as possibly a FUD, F-U-D presentation, which in sales or insurance lingo stands for fear, uncertainty, and doubt. I just want to confirm to everyone this evening that that's not the intent of this presentation. I'm going to steal a line from another insurance company, and basically it's the more you know. So this evening, as the Senior Vice President of Underwriting for Avemco, I'm going to talk about how risks are, what risk you have as a CFI, how various policies may address it, and then answer any questions that you may have on it. This is not a sales presentation this evening. This is more of an informational meeting, and then any questions you have, we'll take care of that this evening, or you can follow up during the day with any of our underwriters. So the essence here is you think you're insured, but are you really? So let's take a look at a couple things. The slide that I've got up now is one of the benefits or things that's nice about Avemco. Okay, here's a 30-second ad that I'll get in. Unless you instruct in it, why should you pay a rate to insure it? So you can see the various types of aircraft on the screen that we offer coverage on, and you can pretty much buy somewhat a la carte the coverage for the types of aircraft you're flying. Now, I'm going to make assumption here this evening is that we've got a pretty good mix of individuals that own a flight school or a commercial flying club, or a lot of you would work for a flight school either as an employee instructor or a contract instructor, and then we'd have it rounded out with a good representation of totally independent flight instructors that work strictly for themselves and aren't affiliated with any other type of business or a flight school. And I will address some of the risks and exposures in each of those situations and how the insurance world tends to deal with that or not deal with it as the case may be. But I want to launch into a question that a lot of people have, and that's why have insurance? And, of course, the first thing everyone says is that, well, it's to pay claims, which is absolutely true. But the main thing that insurance allows you to do as a business, and you basically are a business whether you do this as a avocation or a vocation, is it allows you to stay in business after you've had an accident or a claim. And how does it do that? Well, the things that an insurance policy or a contract does is you pay a known loss each year, which is called premium, and you can budget for that in your accounting and all. In exchange, you pass off the unknown loss, which is a potential accident, to the insurance company. So the insurance company, in the event of an accident, we're the ones that are going to investigate the claim. We're going to provide the defense for you. We're going to handle the settlement offers. We're going to negotiate the settlement. And ultimately, the end result is that we want to make the settlement and obtain the release for you so that you're no longer held under that claim or a liability. Now, we take all of this on. You'll have some involvement with it because we'll get statements from you and things like that, and you may have to be a witness in certain cases. But you don't have to go out and find an attorney that specializes in aviation law or claims. You don't have to put up any bonds, any money like that. And you don't have to interview all of the witnesses on your own. We take care of that for you while you continue to work with your business and give flight instruction or whatever else you need to do if the flight instruction is an avocational activity. Now, that's kind of how the insurance works and why you want to have it. A couple other reasons that you may think of as you look at this is, well, maybe I'm required by the airport to have insurance. Sometimes that's the case. Sometimes a customer will say, well, have you got your own insurance policy? Are you insured for this operation? And at other times it may be that your financial advisor or your spouse says, this is great for you to do, but because of your assets and things, you need to protect that, and an insurance policy will do it. So that's what we try and do with an insurance policy, and that's the intent and how we look at how we want to handle business for you, is we want to take care of all the things that come in with an accident or a claim and allow you to continue to do what you do, and that's instruct. Bob and I were talking a little bit earlier at the start of this, and Bob mentioned he doesn't do much or know that much about insurance. No offense, Bob. And I had to quickly reply, that's okay. I'm not a flight instructor. I'm an insurance guy. So we make a nice combination here.
There you go. That sounds like a plan to me.
Okay, good. Now, another question that everyone has on their mind, and we get this quite often, is how much insurance do I need? And actually, we see this an awful lot out there in chat rooms. And I'd love to be able to give you a pat answer or a finite amount, but unfortunately, the true answer to that question is, well, what kind of an accident are you going to have? And once you had the accident and we've settled everything, we can tell you how much coverage you'll need. It's because it's a liability policy, and we don't have any way to go out and determine exactly what you'll need for every situation. So when we're asked, we as the underwriters, how much insurance do I need, we generally give three recommendations or three things to consider. One is buy as much as you can afford. 2, buy as much as available. 3, buy as much as makes you comfortable. Now, I will admit the slide that you're looking at here is like the 3 bears. It's slightly misleading. I don't know if you can ever have too much insurance, but if you can't afford it, then that's too much. If it's something you can afford and it's the limits you're comfortable with, then that's going to be right for you. One of the contractual obligations we make when we issue you a policy is that we will defend your assets and work to our best ability to settle the claim within the policy limits and obtain the release for you. So the one thing you want to look at is, have I gotten enough that's kind of the industry standard? Is this taking care of the exposures that I see in my normal operations? And will it allow the insurance company to pay for the claim if it's there and negotiate the settlement? Now, I've just said I can't recommend a limit, but if you look at yourself, you can say, well, what kind of assets do I have to protect, and what's my income stream that the insurance policy needs to protect in the event of an accident? And 2, if I'm working with a flight school or a flying club, have they got any kind of requirement of a certain limit of coverage I need to have, either aircraft damage liability for protection to the airplane or a general liability which would provide the protection for you for in the event of an accident or a loss after instruction and someone comes back against you. So if you don't have a lot of assets and not much of an income flow, then you could look at a lower limit of liability, have the options available to you. If you're fairly well off or doing quite well and you have the potential of future income in the more income in the future, then yes, you should look at a higher limit of liability. But again, take a look, how much can you afford, what's available, and how much makes you comfortable. Okay, so kind of answered or talked about that for a minute. Let's get down to who is really insured and kind of where. What you've got on the screen in front of you are definitions from 4 aircraft insurance policies. I'll only identify one company, and that's because the other companies may have done something by endorsement. I may have gotten a hold of an out-of-date copy of a policy or something. But what I want to point out with this, and if you look at the yellow highlights, you can see all of them have the definition of an insured, and they all talk about it's generally you or a person or organization, and it sounds pretty good. And then they generally have but excluded is an insured in any. If you look at the upper left-hand corner, it says any person or organization other than you or providing flight instruction. If you look at the one in the upper right-hand corner, and that's the one I will identify, that's the definition of an insured person in the Avemco Direct Approach aircraft insurance policy, where we define the you, and then we talk about a person or organization using it with permission, and then we go on. However, if you're in the aviation business, then you're not an insured person while operating the airplane in relation to that aviation business. These are all standard or fairly standard definitions in most of the general aviation insurance policies I've seen. So when someone talks about, well, yeah, I've named you on my policy, or yeah, I've talked to the insurance company, or my agent said it's okay, to quote Ronald Reagan, you might want to trust but confirm or verify, because there are some exclusions that are written into a policy. You have to think of the aircraft owner's policy somewhat like your personal auto policy. When you take your car down to the local maintenance shop or dealership, and they do some repair or maintenance on it, and they take it out for a test drive, if they get in an accident with your car, you don't expect your personal auto policy to pay for it to protect the auto shop. Basically, the personal owned or the individual aircraft policy to the owner is primarily for their protection, and it won't automatically or will not always extend coverage to you if you're acting as an instructor to the owner of the airplane. Okay, so we've kind of talked a little bit about the owner's policy and definitions of insured or not insured as they exclude things. So let's take a look at flight schools for just a minute. And I've got to get my disclaimer in, is that I no longer deal with commercial insurance. My experience back in the day, so to speak, was with National Aviation Underwriters, and we did write a lot of flight schools and flying clubs where we had a commercial policy. Anyone that's been around for quite a while probably recognizes that name. Avemco did buy National Aviation Underwriters, and that's how I ended up with Avemco Insurance Company. But when we were writing flight school policies, and the couple that I've had a chance to kind of glance at in my travels, is the flight school policy talks about who the insured, and it's always the policyholder. And then it may have some clause that talks about directors and officers while acting within the scopes of their duties. It may also say that any contract pilot while acting in behalf or in the scope of their duty is a contract pilot for the policyholder. Or it may say you have to be an employee while acting within the scopes of your duty for the policyholder. So if you're working with a flight school, you might want to check with them or a commercial flying club and see exactly what your status is and how that's addressed under the policy. If they've come up and said, well, we've got a clause that says the policyholder, ABC Flight School, any directors and officers and employees, any contracts, instructors working on our behalf are insured, then you've got some primary coverage through the flight school policy. But again, it should be something that you check on to make sure you do have that coverage if you're depending upon it. So we talked a little bit about the aircraft owner's policy and the definition of an insured and how it may or may not work. So if you become a pilot on the airplane, let's say, well, I meet the open pilot warranty, or I'm going to be named on it, when the owner maybe names 2 or 3 other people on it, that may not automatically make you an insured while you're giving instruction in that airplane. You may actually have the benefit of coverage at one activity and no coverage of another, if you can consider that a benefit. If you're flying personally with the individual, or you're flying just for your own pleasure, he's loaned you the airplane, they've loaned you the airplane, and you're a named pilot or you meet the open pilot warranty, you probably aren't insured under the policy definition at that point. You would be under the Avemco policy. However, if you put on your CFI hat and you're now giving dual instruction, whether you're being compensated for it or not, that now moves you into that aviation business or providing flight instruction, and now removes you from being insured under that particular aircraft policy. So you do need to be careful about that. You can be a named pilot under someone's policy, yet it may not be providing you the protection you think that you might be getting out of it or you would like to get. So that brings up the point about someone saying, well, I asked the owner of the airplane to make sure I was insured or an additional insured under their policy. And that's quite often done. There may or may not be a charge with it depending upon the insurance company. Avemco has additional insured status that we will extend to flight instructors and to flight schools or training facilities. Sometimes there's a charge for it, sometimes there's not. Now, when you're an additional insured by endorsement, there's probably 3 or 4 different formats it can come under, and I want to just briefly touch how some of them will be worded or what they will or won't do so that you're aware of it, and again, you can check and see what you need to do to fill in or augment that coverage if needed. One is you can be an additional insured in which it says, okay, we'll make, and I'm going to pick on Bob here for a minute, we're going to make Bob an additional insured under, pick another name, we'll pick on Marcy Veroni, our Vice President of Sales here in Marketing. Per policy, so we've got Bob as an additional insured, and we can issue that additional insured that says, okay, if Marcy has an accident and Bob is named in the accident or the suit because of Marcy's negligence, we'll provide protection for Bob, but not for his own negligence. So under that general heading, Bob's an additional insured, but not for his own negligence. So if a claim comes back against him under that type of an additional insured status, there's no protection under Marcy's policy. So that would be something to be aware of and ask about. You can also be an additional insured, and let's say that it doesn't have that negligence of the policyholder type clause on it, but it says there you're an additional insured with your coverage being excess over any other primary coverage that's available. So there may be some protection for you there, but it may be a little more difficult to get to because they have to go through the steps of saying, well, does Bob in this case have a primary policy that would pick him up, be the flight school or something else, or we've got him covered excess, and does that really do much for him once we've exhausted coverage limits for Marcy under her policy? And we'll get to that in a minute. And then there's a third generally type of additional insured, and it's basically without restriction. It says, yes, the instructor Bob would be insured for his own negligence. He'd be insured if he was named in a suit because of the negligence of Marcy as the policyholder and pilot, and it would not be excess over any other policy Bob may have. Again, all of these types of additional insured endorsements are generally available with most insurance companies. I know I've got them with Avemco specifically, and again, there are some charges associated with some of the coverages, some charges not with others. Now, one last thing in talking about the additional insured, and we hear this quite a bit, and actually you'll see this in the chat rooms quite often. Before I get into that, let me talk a minute about sharing of policy limits. I've got my slides backwards here. When you're an additional insured, the policy limits are the policy limits. The limits aren't increased, they're not decreased, they're not multiplied by the number of insured parties, etc. So in this example here, if we've got a $3,000 policy limit, which is quite frankly very low, if there's an additional insured under Marcy's policy, and both Marcy and the additional insured, in this case Bob, are named in a claim or a suit, we'll defend both with the right endorsements, but it doesn't increase the limit. So basically we've got a dilution. Instead of having $3,000 of coverage available for Marcy, we've got maybe $1,500 available for Marcy because we're going to have to use the other $1,500 for Bob in his defense. So you do need to be aware that if someone says, well, yeah, I've got $1 million policy and you're an additional insured, realistically you need to think of it as maybe I've got a $500,000 policy, because you are sharing the limits with the policy holder. Or in this case, if you're the policy holder, you're sharing the limits with your instructor. Okay, so that brings us up to the subrogation. And subrogation just basically means that once an insurance company's made a payment for a loss, if the loss is someone else's fault or negligence, and they're not an additional insured under the policy, the insurance company has the right to go after them for the amount that the insurance company paid out. Now, I bring this up because if you're an additional insured under a policy, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's a waiver of subrogation for physical damage to the airplane you're operating or instructing in. So if you are going to depend on additional insured status on your customers' airplanes, be sure and also include or ask for the waiver of subrogation, because on one hand, your liability could be protected, but then you may have to turn around at the end of the claim and pay for the loss of the airplane or the deductible or some other amount. So you do need to be aware that subrogation is still an option out there unless it is included in the additional insured status. Sometimes the endorsement will have additional insured with a waiver of subrogation all in one nice clean form. Sometimes there'll be an additional insured for liability with a waiver of subrogation under a different endorsement under the policy. All right, so I'd like to move now on and talk a little bit more specifically about the Avemco policy and what we write for NAFI. And as we go through this, you can take a look at it and say, yep, this will work for me, I've got some questions on it, or I need to work on another avenue. What I've done here is I've highlighted some of the key points. I won't make you suffer through the entire policy. If you can't sleep at night, it's a thrilling read to help you go to sleep a little later in the evening. But the yellow highlight that I've got here is the insuring agreement under our non-owned policy. It's very simple. It says we agree to provide insurance in return for your premium payment, which is, as I said earlier, premium is a known loss that you can budget into against the unknown loss, which is an accident. And then we go on to say the insurance is subject to the terms of this policy. Now, when we get into the terms of the policy, one that is critical in this one is we talk about a commercial purpose. What we've done for the NAFI program is we've taken our basic personal pleasure, personal business, non-commercial, non-owned policy, and we've endorsed it, and I'll get to that here in just a minute. But we define commercial purpose as a charge, aerial photography, money, benefits, etc. We do allow you to have a pro rata sharing of expenses with your passenger if you're just out flying and having a good time. It's not an instructional situation. Then we go on to talk about the special purpose. And we go through and you'll see I've highlighted the special purpose is you're giving flight instruction. Keep this in mind because you'll see where that comes in here in a minute. Now we go on and we define the you and your in this case. We issue policies to individuals. So you are the individual and you're the policy holder named on the data page, and the insurance is for your protection. Now the policy, I didn't want to do that, pardon me. Okay, well, again, I apologize for hitting the wrong button here. Gives you a chance to see all these great graphics once again.
And that's right up there with saying, why is the autopilot doing that?
Well,
anyway.
yeah, that's right. I had to do an override on it. Just too many G's, I guess.
There you go.
Yeah, right, thank you. The coverage A, in a non-owned policy, you have the option of buying two different types of coverages. We call it coverage A and coverage B in Avemco. Sometimes you'll see it as coverage 1, coverage 2, any number of names. Coverage A for us is bodily injury, property damage, liability, and medical expenses. And when we talk about the property damage, we're referring to outside property, not the airplane that you're flying. But it says we will pay for bodily injury, property damage you're liable for. It must occur because of an accident which results from your use of a non-owned aircraft. Okay, coverage B is where we, under Avemco, pick up damage for the airplane that you're operating itself. So if you're not concerned about damage to the plane you're flying, but you're concerned about bodily injury, third property damage, death, then coverage A may be the limits that you want to put all your emphasis on. If you say, well, gee, I've got a deductible or I've got some value in the airplane, I want to add in coverage B, which is for damage to the airplane itself, then that's where that would come in. Again, it has pretty much the same clause as coverage A. Now, every insurance policy is written to where we say, here's all the coverages you've got and what we're going to do for you. And then we come along and say, however, we've got a couple of exclusions that we have to put into the policy, which allows us to control the risk, also keep the premium moderate for you to be able to purchase it, and gives us a defense. So under exclusions, under our standard policy, we exclude commercial purpose, and we exclude special purpose. So right away, we've taken away any coverage if you make any charge for the use of the airplane, or under special purpose, any dual flight instruction or giving of flight instruction. So as a NAFI member, what we do is we endorse the policy. Now, an endorsement amends the policy, and it actually trumps or overrides the text or the wording or condition of the policy. So right away, we've gone in and we've said, okay, we're now changing coverage A to include, and we specifically list providing or having provided dual flight instruction, flight reviews, check rides in a non-owned aircraft. So under this one policy, you've got coverage for your personal pleasure, personal non-aviation business flying of non-owned aircraft, and you also have coverage for your instruction in a non-owned aircraft. I want to point out the text where it says includes providing or having provided dual flight instruction, flight reviews, check rides. That's a key phrase that you want to see in a policy as a professional flight instructor. We put that in there because we wanted to pick up any liability tail you might have for having given prior instruction, and then the individual goes out and has a loss, and they or their estate come back against you. Now, a little bit of history trivia here. Avemco wrote the original NAFI policy back when NAFI was affiliated with EAA. We stopped writing that when EAA switched over and started to work with the Falcon Insurance Agency. And then several years ago, we picked up the NAFI program again, and we wanted to make sure that all of you didn't have any gaps or lapse in coverage for prior instruction given. So we broadly worded this to say, having provided dual flight instruction. So you've got coverage for anything you've done under the NAFI program, originally under Avemco, the NAFI program under Brand X out there, and again, the NAFI program for us. The provision is you have to have a policy in force when the loss occurs. And I'll hit that a little bit when you say, well, what if I'm going to retire? What do I do? We've got a way to take care of that. Okay, coverage B, we do exactly the same thing, where we've now amended it to say, and this is, again, damage to the airplane you're operating. You've got the coverage for dual flight instruction, providing it, having provided it, flight reviews, check rides, etc., and the non-owned aircraft. Now, we've also redefined a non-owned aircraft for you. Under the standard definition, don't take this, as the Bible, it's off my memory. It's 6 seats, 7 seats or less, fixed wing, 450 horsepower, standard airworthiness certificate, land-based. So that's pretty much the standard definition. So under the NAFI program, we've gone on to say, if you look at the yellow highlights, the non-owned aircraft means an aircraft you rent or borrow, or is rented, borrowed, or owned by the person to whom you're giving the dual flight instruction, a flight review, or a check ride. Now, we do go on to say there are some limitations. The non-owned airplane is not one that's owned by you or your spouse, your parents, children, brothers, or sisters of you or your spouse, or a corporation of which any combination of the above own more than 20%. And we do that because we definitely want to make sure we've got a non-owned aircraft, and if you have any ownership interest in it, you really need to buy a policy that's specific to that airplane. Then we do go on to say that, well, we do have a couple of other limits. Can't be turbine powered. Engine can't have more than 450 horsepower, and it can't have more than 7 seats. Now, if you do work in 414s, 421s, and that's what you specialize in, and you're concerned about that wording, contact me, Mike Adams. You can reach me at the office here at 1-800-638-8440, and that'll show up on the end of the screen during the question and answer, because we've been able to put a manuscript endorsement on the policy for those that need it that says the 414, 421 does meet the definition of a non-owned aircraft. So we can take care of you if you're working in those types of aircraft. Okay, then what we've done, and this goes back to that thing that if you don't instruct in it, why are you paying for it? We've then broken the various types of non-owned aircraft into several categories. And we picked categories what we think were of equal risk and also of how we thought instructors would be certificated to instruct. So the basic thing would be these two highlights here, is if you buy the policy, the simplest policy covers aircraft, single-engine land or glider with a standard airworthiness certificate, and it includes special light sport aircraft with an airplane or glider category. So that's what we start with. And then to that, you can start to add additional aircraft, such as the aircraft single-engine C with a standard certificate, and a multi-engine land, again, a standard certificate. You can pick up, if you're into experimental amateur-built aircraft, you can add in experimental amateur-built aircraft, and that would include experimental light sport aircraft in the airplane or glider category. And if you want to do it all, you can pick up all of those coverages for the fixed-wing program. And then we added one more, effective January 1, and that's that we will now pick up, or you can now add in rotorcraft coverage. Now, for the rotorcraft CFIs out there, you do have to have a basic policy for us to add the rotorcraft coverage in. So what you'll do is you'll end up having the single-engine land and the special light sport, and endorse that we'll have the rotorcraft added into that. So you do pick up a little bit of fixed-wing coverage there, but you can add in now the rotorcraft coverage. Bear in mind that the parameters of a non-owned aircraft still apply to the rotorcraft. Basically, turbine power, no more than 7 seats, can't be owned by you or your spouse or family or more than 20% of. But this, when we went out and looked at it, this takes into account the majority of helicopters that I think the primary flight training is going on in, or what owners will come to you for your flight reviews or check rides in. We did have a question about any turbine equipment, and right now we're not going to be in the turbine rotorcraft market or turbine fixed-wing market. However, things are subject to change. We're always looking at avenues to expand our business and provide more support for you. But right now, if you're working in the turbine market, the Jet Rangers and things like that, the policy will not cover those for you. Okay, and I did kind of run through that once you had all the other fixed-wing coverages, then we can add in the rotorcraft, or one of the other fixed wings, we can add in the rotorcraft. Now, two other things that I want to point out here, and then we'll move on to what kind of coverages are available and what kind of rates, and then into the question and answers, is if you're instructing in a experimental amateur build or an experimental light sport or a special light sport, we do require that you have 5 hours in same make and model as a non-owned aircraft. And actually, this falls in quite closely with what the FAA requires. But what we found is, one, is if you've got experience in the plane you're instructing in, you're less likely to have an accident. And number two, if you do have an accident, we have a lot better of a defense for you, because we can point out you've got at least 5 hours prior experience in that airplane versus saying they just walked into it, read the owner's manual, and decided to instruct in it. So do be aware of that 5-hour time. And then one other thing here is we do include up to $5,000 of defense costs in the event of FAA action against you. The thing that's unique about this is that you don't have to have an accident to trigger this coverage. All you have to do is have the FAA start to take a certificate action against you, or a civil penalty by local government or state authority. So if something comes up with this, notify us immediately, because we do have the requirement that we need to know about it for us to address it and pay any of the costs. So if something does come up, even though you haven't had an accident, you do have that coverage written into the endorsement for you. Okay, and here's an example of the coverage options and premiums. We write a 12-month policy, so the premiums that you're seeing listed there are annual. The coverages, this is the coverage A. I want to point out that these rates here apply to the lower 48, and then there's a couple of states that have some exclusions due to some taxes and things that aren't included in this table. But you can either go to our website and it'll calculate some of those changes, or you can give us a call and we can give those to you. But you can see that if we go down the left-hand side, we have lower limits of liability, bodily injury each person, starting at $25,000, and we get up to as high as $200,000 any one accident, or excuse me, $200,000 each person, with $1 million total any one accident. And if you look at the blue highlights going across the top left to right, you can see as you add in more different types of aircraft that you instruct in, yes, there is an increase in premium because the risk has gone up, but it allows you to buy the coverage that you do, that you work with. So if you're primarily aircraft single-engine land, you know, for a $500,000 policy, $100,000 bodily injury each person, that's $385 a year. If you add in additional aircraft, then it does go up for that. If you need higher limits, we do again have that $200,000 bodily injury limit available. Now, the majority of policies that we have on our book of business, and this is not in any way implying that this is enough coverage for you or what you need is just the right amount, but the most commonly purchased general liability limit is that $1 million each accident, $100,000 bodily injury each person. That's the second from the bottom. And interestingly enough, that's still the most commonly purchased limit of liability for an owned aircraft. So the aviation insurance industry is very comfortable with that $1 million with $100,000 coverage on it, and that's what we still like to sell because, one, it's affordable for everyone, and so far we've had a very good success rate in settling claims on it within that limit. Now, I did mention that we've got the rotorcraft. Rotorcraft is another risk, and so the rates are a little higher if rotorcraft is added in, but it is commensurate with the increase in risk. So you can now see where all of the options are available, and all of these do include the rotorcraft option with the limit of liability and the coverages out there. And again, the same exclusions. We've got a couple of states that have taxes, so if you're in Kentucky or New Jersey or West Virginia, you need to call us and we can give you the final figure for those states. Okay, and before I open it up for question and answers, I have just one last thing here. You can call this a benefit or a bonus, or it's Mike Adams trying to cut down accidents so we can control costs and claims. This is a listing of the top 10 causes of loss that we have with our book of business, the owned aircraft policies. We haven't broken it out by various types of aircraft, but when we look at the top 10 causes of loss, these 10 things that are listed right here make up 80% of the claims that we pay. So there's another 20% out there that are miscellaneous one-offs. So as an instructor, I'd like you to take a minute and read through this and say, okay, what can I change, or is there something that I can do that will help prevent a loss, starting with the one most common there is the landing other than gear-related. And to expand on that just a minute, that is just basically poor technique, running off the side of the runway, can't handle a crosswind takeoff, crosswind landing, et cetera, et cetera. So no surprise on that one, really, but that would be a good one to work on. As an instructor, I was saying here, I go, well, gee, we have weather is 14% of our causes of loss. What can an instructor do about that? And the first thing I thought of, is having gone back to my training, is, well, you can reconfirm that you really ought to put on the gust lock every time you leave the airplane. And if you're in an area of high winds, maybe you ought to put on some external gust locks. And if you're in areas of really, really high winds, maybe you need 2 tie downs per wing or tail versus just the standard one. So there are quite a few things that you as an instructor can influence your students or candidates to help them cut down the amount of losses or the potential of having a loss. So I'll give you just a minute to look at that. Actually, Actually, I'll tell you what. This here's the question and answer slides. I'll open it up to question and answers. We've got our phone number on here. I'll put the screen up again. I'm going to go back once more so that if you want to jot down a couple notes off of this or memorize it, there'll be a test at the end of the question and answer period. You'll have that up there. So, Bob, are there any questions I can address or answer for anyone?
Well, I'm going to open up the microphones for everybody. Before I do, I'm going to ask everybody to mute themselves on their phones or their computers. If there's background noise at your location, I can mute you individually, but I really don't like doing that because I don't like being the tough guy here. So with that, I'm going to ask everybody to make sure that they're paying attention to their environment and be courteous. And I'm opening up the mics.
Okay. Actually, Bob, I'll start with the first question. This was asked by David. And his question was that he's an AGI right now and is interested in a policy. He doesn't have his CFI quite yet and was curious about can he purchase a policy that would have the NAFI coverage prior to him being a CFI. And the answer, David, is yes, you could, because it does pick up your personal pleasure, personal business flying. So if you are taking flying lessons yourself in preparation for your check ride, etc., the non-owned policy will apply to that. However, the offer we can make for you is go ahead and buy a standard non-owned policy for yourself because you are flying for your own personal pleasure, personal business, and education. And then once you've passed the check ride and you begin your instruction, call us and we'll add the endorsement, the NAFI endorsement to the policy and just do a prorate change on the amount of premium that's owed. We'll send you a bill for the difference. So, yes, we can work you in. We can get you covered for your non-owed exposure, but in all fairness, I don't want to charge you a premium for a coverage that you won't be able to use right away. So let's start with a standard non-owned policy, and then a phone call. We can endorse it once you've passed that CFI check ride.
Okay, I'm going to read you a question that just came in from Bob McCabe. How do you handle retirement, residual liability when you're no longer actively instructing and carrying a policy?
All right, Bob, good question. Actually, if I had a hat and I could push it through the lines, I'd hand you one for that question because I told you I implied I was going to address that in my talk and then totally blew right by it. What we found, or what we think is a good plan, because our policy does cover instruction given in the past, is that on the day you decide to retire and you pick the day that you've last endorsed someone's logbook with a flight review, check ride, IPC, instruction, whatnot, is that you keep a policy in force for a 2-year period after that last date. The logic kind of being that if anything comes up during that 2-year period and you're the last instructor's name in the logbook, you need the defense. After 2 years, there should be another instructor's endorsement in that logbook, which would help get you off the hook. So at that point, you wouldn't need the policy or shouldn't need the policy in the 3rd year. And we've done things like this in the past. Actually, when we had the old NAFI program, we did write a specific 2-year tail into that endorsement. We don't have that in this policy. And so we're now saying rather than charge you for something you haven't retired on quite yet, just go ahead and keep a policy in force for the next 2-year period, whether you're instructing or not, and then that will provide the protection for you. The benefit is if you decide to stop instructing but still like to fly, you've got the coverage there for your personal pleasure, personal business flying.
Great. Well, I have a question myself, and then I'll turn it back to everybody else. A friend of mine just bought a very nice 182, and I'm instructing him towards his instrument rating, and he graciously added me to his policy so I could use the airplane if I pay him for the gas. So the question that I have is, what do I need to look for specifically on his policy? And I don't know, quite frankly, I don't know who he insured himself with. Could be you, for all I know. But I hope it is. But
be that as it may, what specifically should I look for on his policy to ensure that I'm protected and also that he's protected if I do something stupid with the airplane?
Okay. I'm going to have to answer this as if the customer were insured by Avemco, because I really can't address.
Understood.
Yeah, I can't address anyone else's policies. One, because I don't sell them, I don't underwrite them, and I don't have a copy in front of me. Under the Avemco policy, if you're a named pilot, this goes back to my earlier comments. If you're a named pilot and you're flying for your own personal pleasure and business, our Avemco policy considers you an insured person or pilot. Mm-hmm. And in fact, the Avemco Direct Approach Aircraft policy would allow you to not only pay for fuel and oil while you're operating the plane, but if you said, well, gee, let me kick in a little extra to pay for some of the engine reserves, cost of annuals and things like that, that's allowed under our aircraft policy. So in that situation, you would be insured. The policy holder, the owner of the plane, would also be insured. So in the event that you had an accident as a named insured pilot for your own personal pleasure and business, we would defend not only you under the policy, we'd also defend the policy holder. Because the policy holder does have a liability every time they allow someone else to insure the airplane. And that's basically it's just like when you loan your car. Someone goes out and has an accident with your equipment because you allowed them to use your equipment, they've got a liability for that. Now, if you're instructing at the loss, then we're into, have we got you as an additional insured under the policy for your instructional work, and then is it for your negligence, is it just for the negligence of the policyholder, or is it unrestricted, and is there a waiver of subrogation? I know that you've got a quality NAFI policy, Bob, so what would happen in this case is that the owner's policy would say, well, Bob was acting as an instructor at the time. We don't have him as an additional insured. So the aircraft policy would protect the liabilities and interests of the aircraft owner. Your policy would protect your interests independently as the instructor. And actually the benefit of this is that, let's say that we've got $1 million policy for the airplane owner. You've got your own $1 million CFI policy. And something tragic happens and there's serious death, massive property damage, horrible event. Between the two of you, if you're both sued because we've got against the owner of the airplane, we've got yourself, essentially the insurance company has $2 million that they can use in settlements, $1 million under your policy, Bob, and $1 million under the aircraft owner's policy. So that works quite well for both of you, rather than having the $1 million owner policy basically split, so there's $500,000 for you in your settlements and $500,000 for the owner's settlements.
Okay, well, that's great, and I plan never, ever to even come to you with that problem, but that's great information to know, and it makes me feel better. We have a good, just a reminder to everybody, there's been some background noise. I've had to be mean and mute a few people, so if you're trying to ask questions and you can't get in, that's why. But please mute your mics if you're not speaking. And we do encourage you to jump in and ask a question. The mics are open. There's a great question here from in the chat room, and I don't know the person's first name. It's T. Collins. They thank you for the information about liability limits, and the question they ask is, how should we think about, quote, how much, unquote, for hull coverage, if I could speak?
Okay, good question on there. A couple ways to look at the aircraft damage liability or hull coverage is if you're working with an organization that has you sign some kind of a use agreement or something, and that agreement specifies a limit for damage to the airplane that you're responsible for, that would generally be the limit you'd purchase to. The majority of individuals will look at the airplanes that they're instructing in. They'll take a kind of a median value of it, and they'll say, okay, if I have a, Mike just pointed out that 26% of their losses come in due to landing. Well, let's see, if we have landing, we can look at some prop strike, engine tear down, firewall damage, maybe a wingtip. I instruct primarily in tricycle fixed gear aircraft, 210 horsepower or less. If you get through with all of that, maybe a claim's going to be $25,000 to $35,000 by the time you get done with the engine teardown, inspection, repairs, etc. Now, I'm not saying that that's going to cover all of those losses, but that would be a fairly good range. So you may say, okay, I'm willing to buy a $25,000 limit because that's again what I can afford. That's what I'm comfortable with. I think that's enough that if there is a loss, the insurance company will be able to defend me and get me released from other liability, of which, as I said earlier, the contract we've made is we've got the policy limit, and we're going to defend you to settle a claim within the policy limits. And when we do get a settlement, we get a release. So let's go to this aircraft damage liability hull coverage question again. Let's say you've bought a $25,000 damage to the plane. You're instructing in a 182 landing accident. Turns out that the damage to the plane turns out to be $35,000. Well, we don't hand the $25,000 limit to the other party that's demanding this of you as they file a claim against you and say, go ahead and get the other $10,000 out of our customer. If we tender policy limits, we do that with the intent to get a release, and we generally won't give them that settlement until they do agree to a release. So the other party now has to look at it and say, okay, do I take the $25,000 in the hand now, or do I try and chase the individual personally to see if I can get any more than that, and how much is that going to cost me? Well, if it's insurance companies dealing with insurance companies, we generally make financial business decisions, and so there is the possibility that you can have damage or a claim against you for damage to an airplane that exceeds the limits you've purchased. But if you've purchased a decent limit, it may be enough that we can offer the settlement, get the release for you, and then you're no longer liable. It's not hanging over your head. So again, look at what kind of deductibles are on the airplanes. If they say you're only accountable for the deductible, look at the overall value of the airplane, and again, pick your comfort level as to what types of airplanes you're flying in and what you can afford.
Okay. Don, I'm going to make a hash of this name. Don Elmblad, I assume that's right, asked a great question, and it just scrolled off on me. I apologize. He instructs at a small flight school as an independent, and also on his own, and he does that as an LLC. Does that is he still covered by his NAFI insurance or the NAFI policy if he operates as an LLC in that situation?
See, Bob, I'm going to ask you to repeat that latter part. I didn't quite catch that.
Yeah, I kind of stumbled over it there. So does the CFI insurance that Avemco offers NAFI members still cover him in the case that he is acting as an LLC?
Well, okay. Let me start with a couple of answers here, and then we'll see if we hit that. Working with a small flight school and then acting as an independent, the NAFI policy is going to provide you protection in both situations. Because when you're acting as the independent, the NAFI policy is primary for your protection. You don't have any other coverage out there. So we will be your first line of defense and settlement. When you're working with the flight school, again, depending upon how their policy has been written, you may have some coverage under their policy. If you do, then the NAFI policy automatically becomes excess or stacks on top of it for your benefit. So if you are an insured working with the small flight school, they'll be primary, they'll have their limits, they'll tender to the defense, we'll be excess over that. Again, we'll monitor the situation, and if the damages or claim do exceed or pierce the limit that the flight school has, then yes, your policy will then start to protect you for that additional amount. It won't extend any coverage to your flight school or to the flight school, but it will protect you. Did that answer the question?
That partially, and then he was also concerned about the fact that he's operating as an LLC. A lot of people do that; they incorporate themselves.
Ah, okay. The LLC. Yeah, that's kind of interesting. In that we write a policy for an individual. We don't write it to a corporation or to any businesses. It's Bob Mader, it's Mike Adams, it's John Needhouse, anyone else. If you have an LLC, normally what happens is the person filing the claim, they can file a claim against the LLC. They'll also file a claim against you because you're actually the one, the instructor in the airplane that caused the loss. And the liability always flows to the person or entity that caused the loss. So, you can have an LLC out there, but they weren't the LLC wasn't giving the instruction. It was you personally. So, Bob, if you've got your Bob's LLC operating for your flight instruction, but you're still the flight instructor that's endorsing it, you're still personally liable there. So what Avemco does through our policy is we would say, okay, we're not going to have to defend the LLC because, one, it's not recognized under the policy, and we've issued the policy to Bob. At that point, generally the claimant says, well, why would I bother to go after the LLC? There's really nothing there. It's basically Bob again, or maybe Bob and his spouse. But the coverage is all with Bob, and Bob was actually the instructor at the time of the loss. So I'm going to concentrate my efforts against Bob, and that's where we would tender the defense for it. So the LLC,
so no, I was just going to say, but having an LLC, it doesn't void coverage or anything. It basically just provides coverage for me as a person and not the LLC, correct?
That is correct, because we are issuing the policy to you as an individual, and that's where our obligation is. And again, that's where the suit's going to follow or flow to there, again, because you're the individual that caused the loss or were participating in the loss.
Okay. And I assume that was Dan that followed up on that question, correct?
Don.
Don, I'm sorry. Okay, great, Don. Yep. Thanks for following up there.
Thank you. I appreciate the answer.
Oh, you're welcome.
Sorry, I stepped on you there. There's a question from a Dave R. And this is something my students ask me, my CFI candidates ask me, and I've never had a good answer for this. How common is it that a lawsuit naming a flight instructor goes through to a full trial and is not settled? I mean, I haven't heard of many flight instructors being sued individually to start with, but I'm sure it's happened. But how often does it just keep going?
Insurance companies, as a whole, don't like to go to trial. There's the potential that the outcome can be a whole lot worse than a non-trial. So our intent is to get the settlement within the policy limits before it ever goes to trial. We being the insurance industry, and I can speak specifically about Avemco, we may look at a situation and say, this is defendable on here, but if we do the defense will cost us X dollars. We think, in looking at the losses there, we can settle it for maybe X dollars plus something. We'll take the option of offering the settlement to the plaintiff or the claimant at that point, because one, it saves us the legal fees, it saves you the extra headache, and at this point the claimant oftentimes will look at it and say, well, geez, I don't have to pay an attorney to represent me in a court. We can get this all done behind us and move on with life. So we don't take the action of sue our customer and then we'll defend them. We're very proactive about keeping you out of a court and getting a settlement as quickly and expediently and fairly as possible to allow you, again, to continue on with your business and get on with your life.
Okay, thanks. And I'm going to pass that on to my candidates because that's the most articulate answer I've heard about that because I've always stumbled over and said, well, why don't you ask the insurance company?
Oh, okay, all right. Well, have an ask.
Well, I appreciate that.
All right.
I appreciate that. Well,
question
for a couple more minutes. Yeah, please.
This is Ron. I guess I'd like a feeling for how often is the flight instructor included in a suit? In other words, if there's a average landing accident, how often is the flight instructor named?
Okay. Well, let's back the word suit out of it because again, we don't often get the actual suit. We get more of a claim of where the instructor was negligent in it. Actually, it happens fairly often, primarily if you're doing instruction with primary students out here. We've had some cases where we play both sides of the fence sometimes. We write non-commercial or personal pleasure insurance, and we had a student insured where she was up, this is a pre-solo student, she was up flying with an instructor. The instructor, for all intents and purposes, was a little late on the uptake, and they ended up off the side of the runway on it. First thing that happened is the flight school tried to come back against our student for the loss, and our defense of the student was that no, your instructor was in the airplane and they're responsible for the loss because the student is under the care, custody, and control of the instructor at that point. So at that point, the flight school, well, we didn't insure the flight school and we didn't have a CFI policy for the instructor, but I imagine they had words. We did defend and protect our student and didn't have to settle anything for her. We've also been on the other side of the fence where Brand X, who also writes a non-commercial or personal use non-owned policy, and one of our insured instructors had a landing accident. And yes, we did end up paying on behalf of our instructor because in looking at the facts of it, yes, our instructor failed in their duties to prevent that loss. Again, they just didn't react quickly enough, and the airplane ended up off the side of the runway. Fortunately, in both situations, there was no bodily injury. There was some property damage claims out there. I think they wiped out a runway light and scuffed up the grass or something that the airport had to reseed, and then damage to the airplane itself. And that was covered under the property damage under coverage A for the runway light and the scuffed up grass, and then coverage B, the aircraft damage liability, took care of the damage up to the airplane up to the limits that the CFI had purchased. So you're not going to read a lot of these things in court cases because, again, insurance companies don't want to go to court on this. We'll investigate the facts and negotiate settlements within the policy limits, again, to make sure everyone is taken care of quickly, fairly, and within the limits.
Okay. Well, I think we...
Thank you. One extension, in case I've signed off an IPC or a BFR, and a year later or some months later, that person has an accident, how likely is it that I would be subrogated then?
That's a good question. I can't divulge too much proprietary information in our company. We've seen some cases where a situation like that has happened. Someone's been signed off for solo or an instrument proficiency check, and there has been a loss. It has come back against the instructor on that. In those situations, the defense that we've used is that, wait a minute, this pilot had logged quite a bit of time in instrument conditions, or at least logged the instrument time in his logbook between the IPC and the accident. So we tended the defense that no, our customer wasn't liable for that. There's some other circumstance that came in against it. As it turned out that in that case, we tendered the defense. We didn't offer any settlement, and we did get the instructor removed from the claim. It doesn't happen very often. A lot of times, in the event of a sign-off at some point in the passage of time in an accident, the plaintiffs are going to go after what would be a bigger target, possibly the manufacturer or the last shop that did some maintenance on the airplane, because it seems to be a fair game that they can prove some kind of a mechanical problem with an airplane, certainly not the competence or incompetence of the pilot operating it. But we would tender the defense, and that's why I mentioned on the retirement question is that if you want to keep a policy in force for at least 2 years if you did a flight review as your last activity, so you have coverage during the life of that flight review. If the last thing you did was an instrument proficiency check and the candidate was supposed to go out and do another one in 6 months or keep current on the 6, 6, and 6 on there, you may not want to keep it quite the 2-year period, but that's certainly would be a safe, 2 years would be a safe minimum.
Mike, a follow-up to that, and we have time for a couple more. We've already gone past the hour, but if you're willing to stick around a little bit, I think we.
Oh, yeah, no, that's fine.
Okay. The follow-up from my point is there are many instructors that belong to NAFI that love instructing so much they never want to stop. So in the eventuality that my wife survives me, and I've been instructing right up to the last day, boy, that's a dark thought. But anyway, should she carry my insurance for a couple of years as my survivor?
Boy, this is kind of stump the underwriter night. I've never had a question like that.
And you don't have to answer it tonight. We can follow up later.
Now, but let me give you what my impression would be, and if it turns out to be different after I think about it, I'll get back to you on there. Because you're the one that's done the activity, you've incurred the exposure, the liability would reside with you and not your spouse. Now, there'd be the question of whether your estate would be liable, and I guess if there was no estate left, it all immediately went to your wife. There's nothing to go for, and therefore there probably wouldn't be any kind of a claim.
Okay. So, and I doubt it would ever come up, but it's one of those should you or shouldn't you. If nothing ever happened, we wouldn't need insurance, I'm afraid. So
that's true. Well, I will admit, Bob, I have never renewed a policy that's been in the estate of, if that's the question you're asking.
I believe that is the question. In the short form, that's the question I'm asking.
Okay, yeah. No, we've had some policies that have been in the estate of on owned aircraft, primarily while the estate is in the process of selling the airplane. But as far as a non-owned policy, we haven't ever had anything that's been extended or renewed past the normal expiration date related to an estate yet.
Okay. Trey asks, can you give a sample policy endorsement? Wow. I think what he's asking is, or Trey, if you're on, maybe you could word it yourself because I'm having a little trouble getting to what you're saying. But I believe you're asking about a sample endorsement regarding subrogation.
Yeah. Can you hear me there, Trey here?
Yes, I can. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, just a sample endorsement. One would ask for a waiver of subrogation as a CFI on a policy. Can you give send something or post something that we would ask for?
Okay, let me rephrase the question to make sure I understood it, if you don't mind. Do I have a sample endorsement of an additional insured that would go onto an aircraft policy, or is it something that you should ask for from your customer if you're instructing in their airplane, or are you asking, can you see all of the endorsements and policy that we have for our program?
For a customer endorsing in their airplane.
Okay. I've got the sample endorsements for Avemco that I can provide to you to take a look at. As far as any of the other companies, you would have to have the owner of the airplane or the owner of the policy contact their agent or underwriting company to get a sample of the endorsement so you can see what it says or what limitations it has.
Okay. Thank you.
All right.
This is a good question from Bob McCabe again. If someone is a person of means that has a fairly substantial portfolio, is it likely the claimants will go after the CFI for pain and suffering, a large claim for pain and suffering, or other cause that increases the claim value? That is, the Are they like? Have you seen the likelihood CFI in that situation? Whoa, there we go. Somebody muted their mic again. Is it likely somebody will go after the CFI if they see a target? I guess that's the short form of the question.
Yeah, claims will generally go to wherever the money is. And a lot of times that's why you see an insurance policy or a company maybe tender a limit or tender an offer because that's where the money is and they can get settled within the policy limits. We've had a couple of situations, and these are actually turned out to be on owned aircraft, to where the injured party didn't accept the policy limits offer that we made, and we've kind of speculated that what they wanted was for the party that had caused the loss, the pilot, to have to personally pay something. And when we get into a situation like that, we do negotiate to try and get it settled within policy limits. There have been one or two instances where we've gone back to our customer and said, here's the policy limits that we have, here's the demands from the plaintiff, and we think that if you're willing to make an additional settlement offer, in other words, throw some of your personal money into the pot, we can get it released and you a release for X amount of dollars. And we have done that in a couple of situations with some higher net worth individuals where, and honestly, what the plaintiffs really wanted was to get something personally out of the owner of the airplane. And that's why we were able to settle eventually for quite a bit less than what they were asking, but as long as there was some contribution by the policy holder on there. Now, as far as
you're being polite. In other words, they were making a point.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I interrupted you, Mike.
Yeah. No, I was going to say, on the non-owned side of it, no, I'm not aware of anyone where we've had to go to the individual and ask for anything more over than the policy limit. Now, recognizing some of the experience and wherewithal of flight instructors, that particularly if you're flying as a flight instructor as an avocation, that's why we offered that $200,000 bodily injury limit with $1 million per occurrence. If you go out to our website and you look at our standard non-owned policy, you see that limit's not out there. We don't offer that to anyone other than NAFI members through the NAFI program.
Okay. Richard Clausen, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, asks, does operating under an LLC in any way protect you from having someone come after you personally? And I think you've already answered this before, but just to reaffirm the answer.
Correct. Yeah, it really doesn't out there. And in fact, when I was making a presentation out at the Northwest Aviation Conference in Puyallup, Washington, a year ago, an attorney that was in the audience did specifically make that point in that, yeah, you can set up LLCs and subchapter S's and anything else, but if you're the pilot or you're the person doing the activity, the liability still flows to you because you're the one that, again, was involved with the accident or caused the accident, not necessarily the LLC. So he said, yeah, the LLC may be able to protect some other assets or something, or if you want to bring in members in the event of an owned aircraft, multiple members or something that own the plane. But ultimately, if you're the one operating or you're instructing, you personally are going to be found or held liable for the loss because you're the one that caused it. Okay. Now, as far as tax things, I'll let you work that out with an estate or a tax attorney or an investment guru. I can handle the insurance side of it, and that's why we issue the non-owned policy to individuals, because that's where the liability is going to flow as far as we're concerned.
Okay. I hope I'm wording this question correctly. John Halterman asks, does a non-owned CFI policy cover me for prior instruction I did in my own plane? I sold my previous plane and did instruction in it. I'm not sure if he's asking about a tail on the formerly owned aircraft, or if he did instruction in the airplane after he sold it. So maybe you can answer it both ways.
Okay. depends on the type of policy you had on your owned aircraft. If it was a commercial policy set up for instruction and rental, there may be some kind of a tail on it as long as the loss or the instruction can be proven to have happened during the policy period. As far as if you bought a NAFI policy now, even though our policy does include coverage for prior instruction, it only applies for prior instruction in non-owned aircraft. So our NAFI policy would not provide protection if you had a claim against you for instruction you had given in your owned airplane in the past. So that is a little bit of a coverage gap for yourself on there.
Okay.
Does that answer the question? Or?
Yeah, he just put it up in the chat room that answered what he was looking for. So thank you for that, Mike. Well, does anybody else have anything for tonight? Here's an interesting question, and this is an attorney's question, I think, but I'll throw it at you.
Okay.
Robert Hamaker asked, should I have my students sign a covenant not to sue? Are they effective? I think I know the answer to this one, but go ahead.
Now, this was in relation to a release?
Yeah, I believe so, yeah.
Okay. Well, let's see, I'm not an attorney, but I'll address it from the insurance side. How's that sound?
I think that's a good way to answer it, because I'm stepping away from it myself.
Yeah, okay.
Go ahead.
What we look at is that, yeah, a release is nice to have. It helps to establish that the individual should have recognized that they were getting into maybe a riskier than normal activity. But a release can't sign away the rights of others. So as an example, I could sign a release saying, yes, I won't come back against you for, my injuries if you're a bad instructor and I have an accident. I can sign that release, and there's a chance that we'd be able to defend and say, you're right, Mike Adams cannot come back against the instructor. However, I haven't signed the release, and I can't sign the release that would bar my wife from coming back for a claim due to my injuries or loss, nor my kids. So there's still the potential that there's going to be a claim that comes back against you, even though you do have a release. Now, it may give some defense against the individual, protect you from the individual that actually signed it, but there may be other entities that can still file a claim against you for their loss because of the injuries to the person that did sign the release. So don't depend on a release to get you out of everything. However, if you're in Alaska, they have an interesting law up there that you could look into that might work. Okay.
I will follow up your answer with something that a good friend in the business who is, he's not an attorney, but he is a private accident investigator, and his simple answer is document, 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 and get your students to review and agree to what you documented. I think that would make your life a lot easier in a claim situation. That's just Bob Mader's opinion. Talk to an attorney. Dave R. asks, do statutes of limitations provide any comfort in all of this?
Oh, the statute of limitations?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, once the time period is expired, they can't come back against you for it. I mean, that's the whole purpose of that. And we do, when we're working with claims or we have a claim and we're monitoring potential claimants, we do pay attention to the statute of limitations because we know that there's a date that an action has to be started or they've lost their chance to take any action on it at all. Whether you think you can hide out for the entire period of a statute of limitations and hope no one finds you or files a claim or starts an action, I don't know that would be a wise defense or a wise move to make. But we have had some cases where some of what we thought would have been potential claimants either opted not to file a claim, or by the time they got around to it, the statute of limitations had come and gone, and they could no longer file the claim.
Okay. And Jim Mosel, and I think we'll close with this question. Jim Mosel asks, if I get an Avemco policy today, do I get any protection for previous instruction? And I believe you've answered that before, but go ahead and reiterate.
Well, right now, the provisions are when we do pick up coverage for prior instruction in a non-owned aircraft, the accident has to occur during a policy period. So if the instruction was given 6 months ago and the accident occurred 2 months ago and you bought the policy today, there's no coverage for that. If you gave the instruction 6 months ago, he bought the policy today, 2 weeks from now the accident occurs and the claim comes in, then yes, our policy will pick up that loss or that exposure because the loss or the accident occurred during a policy period and it's attributable to prior instruction or instruction having been given.
And I've got to say, that's just on a personal level, Mike, that's very generous of Avemco. I'll just put it that way. I have to say thank you very much, Mike. It's now 9:20 out where you live, and it's making for a late night for you. So I really, really appreciate your time. Again, if you could just let everybody know how they can reach Avemco and talk to the underwriters, ask any questions. And I got to say, great customer service there. They take very good care of me every year. They make sure that if I haven't called, they call me to make sure that I've taken care of business. So, Mike, if you want to pass on the contact information, please do.
Well, yeah, the contact information, let me give you a couple numbers. I had mentioned a little earlier, 800-638-8440. That's our general 800 number, so you see that all over. The other number that we've got up here would be 888-635-4302. And then last but not least, you can contact us through our website or our email. We've made it easy for ourselves. Remember, it's avemco@avemco.com.
Great. And also, for those of you that are going to Sun and Fun, you will have a booth there this year, right?
Yes, we'll have a booth there again, and I'll be making a couple of presentations having to do more with general aviation and accidents, and I think I'm making the presentation again, actually I know I am, on when kind of pilot runs out of gas. I'll be doing that in the FAA auditorium down at Sun and Fun. So
terrific.
Yes, we will see you there, and we'll see you at the dinner.
Okay, and I got to be sure to bring you a blue shirt for that one. And
okay.
And also you'll be at, of course, AirVenture, and
correct.
And folks, the presentations are great, and the people that staff the Avemco booth are really great to talk to and are very knowledgeable. And they don't have the answer right there and then; they turn the answer within 24 hours for you. They're just terrific people to work with.
Yeah. Well, we try and do our best. It's a great relationship. We have kind of an informal motto here to all of our customers that says, train early, train often. If you're from Chicago, you may recognize we stole that from one of the dailies.
And I grew up in northern Cook County, Illinois, so I know exactly what you just said.
Okay.
And on that note, next month's webinar, third Wednesday of next month, I don't have a calendar in front of me, so I believe, this being a 28-day month, it will be the 18th again. Next month's webinar will be, we'll have Stephen Weaver. He will be talking about the instructing remotely using home PCATEs or simulators, whatever. He will be joined by H. Bruce Bajorny, and boy, I butchered that one, Bajorny and Bill Lewis. And we look forward to having all of you here. In the meantime, those of you in the northern tier of the country, stay warm. Be careful driving to and from the airport. Make sure you take care of your students and your airplanes, and dress accordingly. And spring is coming, I promise. For those of you in the southern tier and out in the warmer parts of the West Coast, I will merely say I'm very, very jealous. So everybody be safe. Have a great night, and we'll see you next month.